Hey, everybody. So good to be here with all of you tonight. Let's have yet another one of our great late night conversations. I am looking forward to it, and I hope that you are as well. Let's have another late night chat.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Yet another great late night conversation. We talk about all kinds of wide-ranging politics on here. So the way we do things, as all of you who watch this are probably very familiar, but for those of you who might be new, the way we do things is I give my opening remarks. That's whatever it is I want to talk about for tonight. Then after that, we do the roll call where I find out who is watching, who's on the other side of the camera. And then from there, I answer people's questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something that you would like me to talk about in the second half of tonight's show, send me a super chat, send me a Rumble rant, and I'll get to it in the second half of the show. That's the way it works. So yeah, first opening remarks, then roll call, then super chats. Now, a couple quick announcements to get out of the way. Every morning we have morning messages on the CPI YouTube channel. This morning, Timoshenko made a great message about mental toughness. It was absolutely tremendous. A great message about the concept of mental toughness. I thought it was very helpful. And so we do this every morning, and it's a way to stay engaged with the CPI community. Obviously, there's a lot more to this community than just me. There's all kinds of members of this organization in different parts of the country. We got our team out in Chicago right now doing great work. Shout out to them. I think they're at a Cuba Solidarity event tonight, and we're doing great stuff. So one way to stay plugged in is to listen to the morning messages that go up every morning. And they premiere 6 a.m. Eastern time, but then you can watch them afterwards, obviously. It's a great way to start your day. Start your day with a morning message from the Center for Political Innovation. Great way to start the day. Go to the CPI YouTube channel and subscribe and, tune in and check every day for a morning message, for a great way to start your day. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. We've had great messages so far, and I actually was going to play one last night with David Rovics that was 2 days ago, and I forgot to play it. So hopefully I remember to play it. But also, we now have this option where you can make a morning message. Right? If you want to support other members of the community, with this very easy link, you can make a morning message. So if you feel inspired by what we do on this channel, you'd like to give some hope to other members of our community, by all means, go and make a morning message. I'll drop it in the chat. You can make a morning message to send for the CPI YouTube channel. A great way to stay plugged in with our community. So those are my morning, or that is my first announcement. My next announcement is that our team is in Chicago. We've got a great team of people in Chicago right now. And they were at the they were at the Democratic National Convention protests. They have been doing a lot of things, and now they're still there. They'll be going to the protest tomorrow. And today they were in the streets of downtown Chicago. They were there on Monday. They were at the Jimmy Dore show on Saturday or on Friday. They're doing great stuff. And actually now would be a good time to show that morning message from them. This was, they went to a concert by our beloved musician friend who's played at many CPI events before, David Rovix. So why don't I just put on the morning message that some of our Chicago team made yesterday, it aired yesterday.
This is CPI in Chicago, and we are at the People's Army. Poor People's Army. That's right, People's Army is the Poor People's Army concert. And we're here for two reasons. Number one, to pass out the book exposing how dangerous Kamala Harris's foreign policy is, how she makes even Joe Biden look like a pacifist. And the other reason why we're here is to hear David Rovix and Kamala Emanuel sing. And, CPI and the Poor People's Army, we might not agree on everything. But there's one thing that we agree on, is if you're going to have an anti-war rally, you have to have these two perform. Right? They sing songs about Gaza, songs about Aaron Bushnell, songs about Hugh Thompson, songs about the Gaza flotilla, and songs about the Uhuru movement. So definitely, if you want to stop war, don't have a boring meeting, right? Have a meeting with music. And invite Dave and invite the good Kamala. This is the Kamala that's against locking people up. And they're great performers. This is going to be a great concert. It's part of the blitz that CPI is doing of all the events around the Democratic National Committee, getting the truth out about Kamala Harris. So join CPI, stop the wars, and do whatever you can to support David Rovix and Kamala Emanuel and their pro-peace music.
And be looking out for the video spread of people that we're doing out of the movement and to the masses with, who are receiving Kamala's book as a free book, that we're giving out during the DNC. So until we meet again next time.
Uhuru.
Yeah, that was from our team out in Chicago. They're doing great work at the Democratic Convention. There's still one more day, right? Tomorrow is the day that Kamala accepts the nomination. There's a protest. I believe it starts at noon. People were protesting last night. People are protesting right now. So I will say what I've said on the last few streams. If you want to support this effort to get 1,000 copies of the Kamala Harris book distributed at the Democratic National Convention, if you want to offset the cost of that, 1,000 copies of these books and 1,000 copies of our growth booklet, you can support us on the GoFundMe right now. We have a GoFundMe set up. People have been donating very generously. We do appreciate it, but more is always needed, and it's offsetting the cost of all of that. It was expensive to get all the books printed, expensive to get them all out to Chicago, expensive to get a couple of our volunteers there from out of town. So if you can donate to the GoFundMe, that is always appreciated. The next bit of travel that I've got coming up is I am headed to Florida, Tampa, Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida, for the Uhuru trial. I will be there on the opening day in federal court of the Uhuru trial, which is the most important trial happening in the United States. I couldn't go to the DNC. My job had other plans for me, and that's fine. I've got great folks in the streets out there representing us. But I will be headed to Florida because I am going to be there for the Uhuru 3 because that case is serious. So that's my next big travel date coming up. But until then, I'm holding the fort down here in Brooklyn. So those are my announcements. Morning messages, always appreciated, and support the Chicago outreach team. It's doing great work out there in Chicago. They were on this channel on Tuesday night or Monday night talking up a storm about all the great stuff they're doing. I'm sure they're going to have a lot of great stuff to report back on. So you saw John and Gavin and Phil in the video there, and I'm sure they'll be doing great stuff. So those are our announcements. Quick reminder, the way these streams work, I give my opening remarks. I then follow with the roll call. And then I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if you have something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, send a super chat. It is always appreciated. So now I'm going to jump into my opening remarks. Folks, there's an expression that gets used. They will refer to generals fighting the last war. I don't know if you've ever heard this. Generals fighting the last war. Generals fighting the last war. What that refers to is the fact that if one is involved in an event like a war, in which the stakes are very high, in which mistakes are very costly, in which the decisions that you make have a very big impact, and you're the general, you're the person at the top making the decisions, after that war is over, you will frequently, in your mind, go over what could we have done better? What could we have done better? What could we have done right? What did we do well? What did we do wrong? And that when the next war comes around, in your mind, you will be trying to get everything right that you got wrong last time. You will be trying to incorporate all the lessons that you learned from the previous conflict. And in some cases, they don't apply. Now, on this channel, we've talked endlessly about how that applies to leftism, how what the new left in the 1960s left and the new communist movement learned in the 70s is really detrimental, and that a lot of the communist groups are stuck in a rut. I talk about the Great Retreat, etc. But on this live stream, we're going to talk about it a little bit different, because we're going to be talking about the Donald Trump campaign. And we're going to be talking about how it appears to me, I don't know this for a fact, but it appears to me that there is a significant element within the Trump camp that is trying to replicate Ronald Reagan's victory over Jimmy Carter in the 1980 presidential election. And that is what they are trying to do. That is what they are trying to do. Hold on. They're trying to reenact what Ronald Reagan did in 1980. And first of all, what Ronald Reagan did in 1980 wasn't so great. On Fox News, they make it out like what Ronald Reagan did in 1980 was some great, great victory for America. I would beg to differ. I would strongly beg to differ for what some of you may consider to be obvious reasons, but maybe for some of you are not so obvious reasons. I always want to assume that my audience knows nothing. And, and we do have a nuanced view here. We are not cheerleaders for leftism. We're not supporters of the synthetic left or the new left. We're very critical of wokeism, etc. So, our critique of Ronald Reagan and the so-called Reagan Revolution is not a defense of the synthetic left. But I must get back to this point because, my wife and I, about a year ago, was it a year ago, maybe 6 months ago, recently, not very recently, but somewhat recently, my wife and I, we went to go see a movie that was about the rise of the Jesus people, the Christian revivalism that emerged out of the hippie counterculture. We went to go see this movie that was called Jesus Revolution. We went to go see the movie, and I watched the movie, and it was about various people that were involved in drug culture and had been, kind of lost, involved in drug culture, who then became evangelical Christians. They got involved with Calvary Chapel in California, and I think it's in the Bay Area. or whatever. And I was watching the movie, and it was a well-made film, and it pointed to a lot of the damage that was done by the counterculture and by the synthetic left, and it hinted at government involvement. At one point in the film, it actually showed a military airplane flying over a crowd at a rock concert and dropping, LSD pills out of the window, kind of hinting at MK Ultra. But then, when the movie ended, the end of the film was what was the end of the film? The end of the film was talking about, the rise of the religious right and how all these people became evangelical Christians. In the 1980s, they were having all these big prayer services. And I saw that and I thought, I was with you until then. I was glad to see these people get off drugs. I was glad to see these people be religious. But I ain't celebrating. Right? That happy ending is not a happy ending for me, because I know what happened in the 1980s. I know that in the 1980s, the war on drugs that came as a blowback in response to the 60s counterculture revolution resulted in mass incarceration. Millions of Americans were locked up. The tough on crime policies that targeted low-income Black people were devastating. And, the war on drugs and Dare and all of that was absolutely devastating. It was devastating for working families. I also know that internationally, it wasn't good. I know, I've got a wife from Guatemala, and I know what went on. I've been to Nicaragua. I've been to El Salvador. I know what the Reagan Revolution meant in Central America. It meant armed terrorist groups massacring civilians, executing Catholic priests and nuns, overthrowing elected democratic governments, and installing fascist military juntas in the name of evangelical Christianity. I mean, it wasn't good. So I saw that and I'm like, I can't celebrate this, right? I can't celebrate millions of low-income Black people, maybe some of whom need drug treatment, being locked in prison. I can't celebrate death squads in Honduras and Guatemala and Nicaragua and El Salvador. And, I certainly can't celebrate what that's led to, which is the crisis on our border right now and all the instability that has continued in Central America ever since. I can't celebrate that. I can't celebrate anti-labor laws. Ronald Reagan's big move was crushing the PATCO, the Air Traffic Controllers Union, and driving down their wages. I can't celebrate these things. So that was not a happy ending for the movie. And when conservatives celebrate the Reagan Revolution, we need to ask them some serious questions. The first question being, you like Islamic terrorism? You like Al-Qaeda? And of course, they're going to say no. Well, the Reagan Revolution brought us Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden was trained by the United States, by Ronald Reagan, to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. You like drug cartels and the narco gangs in Mexico? Of course, they're going to say no. Well, that's the Reagan Revolution. That was the Contras. Ronald Reagan even broke the law after Congress outlawed giving money to those terrorist and extremist and drug-dealing groups that were fighting against socialism in Latin America. He continued funding them. That was the whole Iran-Contra scandal. And you say, you like getting rid of good-paying industrial jobs. And they're going to say, no. We want to make America great again. We want strong jobs. Well, that is not what Ronald Reagan created. Ronald Reagan oversaw weakening the power of labor unions and sending jobs overseas, deindustrialization. Go watch Roger and Me. And the Reagan Revolution is not something to celebrate, but it's something to study. It's something to study and it's something to learn from. And I think that there are a lot of people in the Trump camp who don't want another Reagan Revolution. And they might think they want a Reagan Revolution. They might like the idea of a Reagan revolution in a spiritual sense. And that is something that we need to understand. Now, I'm going to show you a Ronald Reagan advertisement from 1984. This is Ronald Reagan's, one of his famous ads, probably his most famous ad. It's from 1984. This advertisement came out, and I think a lot of Trump supporters who might think they want another Reagan revolution, they want to get back to the mindset of this ad. And this kind of gets to the essence of what I'm talking about tonight. Right? This is the famous Morning in America ad. And the reason this ad is so effective is because it's true. Right? I mean, this ad doesn't lie. And this ad points to some really biting reality. So I'm going to put on the famous Morning in America ad from 1984. This is Ronald Reagan's most famous advertisement, the advertisement with which he won re-election in 1984 against Walter Mondale. Here we go.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
All righty. So that's the Morning in America ad. And why did it strike a chord? And why is it that there are a lot of Trumpers who are against the war on drugs, who are against U.S. military interventions overseas, who are certainly against deindustrialization and getting rid of good-paying industrial jobs, who are against a police state, who want to have compassion for those who struggle with addiction, probably know people or have people in their family or know people in their neighborhoods and communities who've struggled with opioids? Why is it that so many of them have this glowing nostalgia for the Reagan Revolution? And why is it that folks in the Trump camp are trying to reenact the Reagan Revolution? There's a lot here. And in order to do that, we need to go back to the administration of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was president of the United States from 1977 to 1981. Left office in 1981, took office in 1977 after winning the 1976 presidential election. And Jimmy Carter was the first new left president. And this is important to remember. Left-wing politics was reinvented during the 1960s. The Democrats had been the party of the Democrats had been the party of Roosevelt. They'd been the party of the labor unions. They'd been the party of the Dixiecrats and the Jim Crow South. And you had Lyndon Johnson, who was a Southern Dixiecrat, good old boy, but who passed a lot of welfare state reforms, was associated with welfare programs, was associated with labor unions. You had the Kennedy administration. And then after Lyndon Johnson, you got Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was reelected. Richard Nixon resigned. You got Gerald Ford. And then after Gerald Ford, you had the first Democrat to take office who was not an old school Democrat. Jimmy Carter was from the New Left. The New Left. And the New Left was very different than the Old Left. For example, Jimmy Carter claimed he had seen a UFO. And he talked about this on the campaign trail. I have seen a UFO. I'm a peanut farmer from Georgia, and Jimmy Carter, saw a UFO in the sky. I do not know what it was, but I saw it. That was certainly new for American politics. Jimmy Carter believed in degrowth. And in fact, it was the Carter administration that published the Global 2000 report, which put forward the notion of overpopulation and said it was the desperate need of the United States government to drive down the population, reduce the population. Jimmy Carter met with gay rights activists at the White House. Jimmy Carter met with, and he sponsored a women's conference, a conference for women to talk about feminism. And he sponsored it with government money, and women from all over the country went to this conference to write out the women's agenda. Basically a feminist rally sponsored by the American government, the Women's Conference sponsored by the Carter administration. But more importantly, while Jimmy Carter was promoting feminism, and while Jimmy Carter was somewhat sympathetic to LGBT, and while Jimmy Carter claimed he'd seen UFOs, and while Jimmy Carter was talking about overpopulation, Jimmy Carter was wrecking the U.S. economy. Jimmy Carter more or less believed that the way to save the United States was to transition to what he called a post-industrial society. We needed to become a society without industry, right? We needed to deindustrialize as a society, and we needed to reduce the population, reduce consumption. And on top of that, he was very, very opposed to nuclear power. And he actually used the FBI to target people in his own party who were pro-growth. And they called them the smokestack Democrats. And he launched an operation called Abscam, where the FBI had a guy dressed up as an Arab sheikh who would entrap members of Congress, offer them a suitcase full of money, and it was all an FBI sting. And in a number of cases, the Arab sheikh actually pushed the money, would give the money to the congressman, and the congressman would say, no, I don't want it, and shove it back to him. And the juries would still convict the members of Congress. The FBI just started targeting Democrats, not Republicans, Democrats from New Jersey, Democrats from Pittsburgh and urban centers who were tied to labor unions, who believed in economic growth, and targeted them with Abscam as a way to purge the Democrats of pro-growth, working class oriented Democrats. And if you watch the movie American Hustle, it's like a fictionalized version of this. It shows Abscam in New Jersey, what was done, how they targeted a member of Congress in this manner. And then the energy crisis happened because the Arab countries were angry about continued U.S. support for Israel. So you had the energy crisis. And the price of gasoline was through the roof. And they were rationing gasoline in different parts of the country. And, Americans were paying more for gasoline than ever before. And there was big lines to get gasoline. And as this is happening, there's an economic downturn. The economy is shaking. And Jimmy Carter gets on television and tells Americans that the answer is you need to wear a sweater. You need to wear a sweater instead of turning up the heat. Look at my sweater. If you don't turn up the heat and instead you wear a nice warm cardigan sweater, why you'll save money on the heat. And people are looking at this and they're like, seriously, you're the president. All right, we got an international crisis. We got an energy crisis in the country. And, you know, they say one of the worst moments of Jimmy Carter's presidency was the malaise speech. And the malaise speech was in response to an economic downturn. He gave this awful, awful speech. And in that speech, again, Americans, there's unemployment rising. Americans are losing their jobs. The prices are rising. They've got inflation. At the same time, unemployment is rising, like a double hitter. They'd never had this before. They got inflation and unemployment, and it's just a bad economic situation. First big economic downturn since the end of the Second World War. So what does Jimmy Carter do? Jimmy Carter gets on television and he tells the American people, owning things and buying things is not going to make you happy. You don't need to find satisfaction in owning things. Now that might be a spiritual critique of consumerism, etc. But to the American people who are watching their living standard go down, this is messed up. This is completely messed up. Instead of fixing the economy, you're giving us a lecture about how we should just have less and be happy about it. Instead of fixing the energy crisis, you're telling us to put on a sweater instead of turning up the heat. And then he turns the U.S. economy over to Paul Volcker. And Paul Volcker is a banker. And Paul Volcker overturns all the usury laws in the country. It used to be a lot of states regulated lending money. And they had a law against, you could only lend money at a certain rate. And if you lended above that rate, it was considered usury. It was illegal. Well, the Federal Reserve and Paul Volcker, appointed by Jimmy Carter, passed a law that forbid that. And so lenders suddenly could start robbing the American people with loans that were insane, right? And the protections from being ripped off by bankers were being lifted. The economy is getting worse. And the U.S. foreign policy during these times is run by Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Zbigniew Brzezinski is a Cold War soft power strategist. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, he taught at Columbia University. He was a Polish Roman Catholic. He hated Russians and hated communism. He'd been head of the Center for Communist Studies at Columbia University. And his whole strategy was to beat the communists at their own game, manipulate the communists, right? Don't let the communists do their thing. One of the things he bragged about is that he and Jimmy Carter set the Afghan trap. The USA had lost in Vietnam. And so in order to hurt the Soviet Union, Zbigniew Brzezinski admitted that they gave the Soviet Union a Vietnam. They created a situation where the Soviet Union felt it had to move its military into Afghanistan. And then they used that to boycott the 1980 Olympics that were held in the Soviet Union. They used that to start funding Islamic extremists like Osama bin Laden to go into Afghanistan, right? And the United States looked weak. Jimmy Carter was this soft, tired, peace president. I understand you're upset. I'm a nice man. I am not like my predecessors. I am a kind-hearted man. I did the Camp David Accords. I met with the Palestinians and the Israelis. I listened to them, and I never attacked a country. I'll never do Vietnam again. Such a nice, tired, old Southern man, right? Meanwhile, around the world, the USA created a war in Nicaragua, created a war in Afghanistan, created all kinds of instability and rebellions in the Eastern Bloc. And the idea was have the United States look weak. Have the United States look weak, while at the same time escalating covert operations. Make the USA look like Mr. Nice Guy. Put a soft, kind-hearted man in charge of it. And say, look, Why are the Soviets being aggressive in Afghanistan? And the people in Nicaragua, they just don't want the communists in power. They're fighting for their freedom. And I'm just sitting here as a peanut farmer, and I met with the Palestinians, and I even met with communist China and Deng Xiaoping. We just want to get along, and these communists are being crazy. When in reality, behind the scenes, the USA was manipulating everything. Look, we pulled out of Vietnam. But those communists in Vietnam, the Cambodians, the Vietnamese, they're all just killing each other. Well, what was really going on was the USA was airdropping weapons and funding Pol Pot to attack Vietnam. The USA arranged for the Afghan government to have a violent Islamic insurgency against it, and the Soviet Union to feel that they had to go in. The USA was arming the Contras of Nicaragua to try and overthrow the Sandinistas. The whole thing was arranged by the United States, but the image was the United States is just a soft country that doesn't want to bother anybody. And we got this tired old man up there who's just being nice and meeting with everybody and shaking hands with Deng Xiaoping and Yasser Arafat. And he wants to meet with the gays and the feminists. And he's just this nice old man when it was a facade. And Jimmy Carter did a lot of apologizing for the United States, and he apologized for racism, and he made a big point of talking about the history of Jim Crow segregation. And it was about making the United States look soft and not scary while amping up covert operations. Make the USA look like it's retreating around the world while amping up covert operations. Make the Soviet Union look like the aggressor, and at the same time, weaken the U.S. industrial base. Because these are strategies, these strategies of Zbigniew Brzezinski are all thought of by the big oil companies, right? The Rockefeller think tanks, the Ford Foundation, right? This kind of soft power manipulation. These are the strategies of the big oil companies. And what makes money for oil companies? Scarcity. The less oil on the market, the higher the price is, supply and demand. And what did Jimmy Carter do as president? He created a situation where there was an energy crisis. The price of gasoline was through the roof. The OPEC boycott and all kinds of situations, it all led to a situation where there was energy scarcity. And oil companies made out like bandits because the world's oil supply was in limited reserve. There was fury in the Middle East. There was all kinds of tension. And so there was an energy crisis, and with a scarcity of gasoline, the oil companies made a lot of money. However, if the price of gasoline is through the roof, what does the domestic economy of the United States need to run? Gasoline, right? If the price of gasoline goes up, everything goes up. Why? Because if you bought it, a truck brought it, as Jimmy Carter used to say. I'm sorry, as Jimmy Hoffa used to say, the Teamsters Union. He said, if you bought it, a truck brought it. And that's true. And if the gas prices go through the roof, the price of food goes through the roof. The price of all kinds of consumer goods goes through the roof because they're all being brought in a truck. And so the inflation, as a result of the oil prices being through the roof, you have inflation. Americans are being squeezed, right? And you have an economic situation, but that's okay for these big oil companies, because they're all tied in with big banks and they're invested all over the world. They're thinking about how to dominate the world. They don't care what's going on in Detroit or Pittsburgh or Main Street or your neighborhood. They're thinking about the global economy and how they can create an oil shortage and make the oil prices go up, how they can play a long strategy game and defeat the Soviet Union, how they can give money to the Cambodian communists to kill the Vietnamese communists, how they can pretend to be friendly to the Palestinians while arming Israel, how they can force the Soviet Union to have to intervene in Afghanistan. They're playing a long game about how they can dominate the world and how they can create scarcity. And central in their long game is driving down the population. They think the problems of capitalism are all rooted in overpopulation. The problem isn't No. The problem isn't capitalism. The problem isn't the irrationality of the market. The problem is there's just too many poor people, right? All these poor people are having too many children, and we don't need them at our assembly line, so we just need to reduce the population. So they're sitting there, the oil banking monopolies, Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller think tanks, they're sitting there, and they're they're having a field day here, right? They made the Soviet Union look like the bad guy in Afghanistan. They made they're funding a people's revolution in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas, right? Their oil prices are higher than ever. They've got the communist Vietnamese and the communist Cambodians killing each other. They make friends with the communist Chinese and Deng Xiaoping and are manipulating all the allies of communist China to fight against the Soviet Union. They're having a field day. This is great, right? No, I mean, they don't care, right? What if you can't afford high energy costs? You can't afford to heat your home in the winter? Well, put on a goddamn sweater, loser. We don't care about you, right? Maybe don't have so many children. Maybe that's your problem, right? They don't care about America. They don't care about American working families. They don't care about the American economy. And it's not just the working class that's getting the crap kicked out of them by Jimmy Carter's policies. It's also the bulk of the American capitalist class. And this is where it gets all tricky, right? These policies benefit the oil banking monopolies. They benefit the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and the DuPonts, the people that pay for Brzezinski, that paid for the Trilateral Commission. You look at that, almost every official in the Jimmy Carter administration came from something called the Trilateral Commission, which was a think tank set up by Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski to reorient U.S. foreign policy after the failure in Vietnam. And the U.S. economy is down for the count. I mean, the oil prices, the gas prices are high. You got inflation and high unemployment. Everyone's struggling. And then you got a president up there who's like, oh, maybe you should put on a sweater, and owning things is just not good, owning things. And, he's concerned about feminism. He's concerned about LGBT rights. And he's apologizing for America. And he's talking about, oh, we used to be a racist country. That's no good. We need to not be a racist country no more. And a lot of Americans are like, what in the world is going on? But a lot of lower level capitalists are feeling this way, especially because Jimmy Carter cut the military budget. Again, that fits the message. It's not about having the USA directly fight countries. No, it's about covertly arming different forces around the world. It's about arming the Contras in Nicaragua. It's about arming the Afghan, Mujahideen and Osama bin Laden. And we want to make the USA look weaker. So Carter cuts the US military budget. Well, those generals in the military, they don't like that. Cutting the military budget, that's insane. And also, they don't like all the apologizing that Jimmy Carter is doing. And the American industrial capitalists, especially those involved in manufacturing weapons, they're feeling the crunch. And local, low-level capitalists are feeling the crunch also. Americans can't afford to buy at their stores, right? The guy who owns the Walmart or the hardware store, people can't afford to buy his products. And so the domestic economy of the United States is struggling. And Jimmy Carter is letting the bankers and the oil monopolies just roll over the U.S. economy. And he's playing a long strategic game against the Soviet Union. And he signs the SALT Treaty with the Soviet Union, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which is against, nuclear testing against nuclear weapons. And a number of Pentagon generals take an ad out in the New York Times condemning Jimmy Carter. There's a division in the ruling class. And this is very clear. Ronald Reagan is a hard right-wing conservative, former governor of California. He's tied in with military defense contractors. And he's a hard right-wing anti-communist. He used to do an anti-communist radio show. And Ronald Reagan is tied in with the military-industrial complex. So the Reagan Revolution was largely an uprising by lower-level capitalists. Not even really lower-level capitalists, by the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon against Jimmy Carter and the oil monopolists. And it was the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon saying that they had had enough of the kind of long-term geostrategic social engineering Malthusian policies of the ultra-rich. And the key event in the Reagan Revolution was the Iran hostage crisis. So Iran, for a long time, has had a brutal military dictator backed by the United States, the Shah, right? The Shah is overthrown. And the students in Iran, they seize the American embassy and they hold a number of the people in the American embassy hostage. Now, I have seen the American embassy in Iran. They now call it the Nest of Spies. It's a museum showing the evils of American imperialism. And what they did is they let every black person in the American embassy go. They let almost all the women go, except for the ones that were CIA officers. And then they held the remaining hostages there. And they held the American hostages there. They seized the embassy. So what happened? You know, the Iranian students seized the embassy. You have the Iran hostage crisis. So what happens? Well, you start having anti-Iran protests in America. Iran has disrespected our country, is the message. Iran has disrespected America. They seized the embassy. Bring our hostages home. They start putting up yellow ribbons everywhere. Bring our hostages home. There are t-shirts that people wear. And it's kind of taking on a little bit of a counterculture edge, right? You remember, this is not where things are, but they have t-shirts that say Iran sucks. That was a popular t-shirt in 1979. Like edgy punks, they would have t-shirts with American flags on it that said Iran sucks. And they start having these rallies all across America where people have these big American flags, bring our hostages home, then the yellow ribbons, and Iran sucks. And they start having these patriotic rallies. And it's like, Jimmy Carter is a bad president because he's letting America be humiliated and embarrassed by the Iranians. And he's apologizing, and we need America to come back and kick some ass. Now, I'm going to tell you this next part. I'm going to tell you this next part because you need to hear it. And this part might not be of interest to everybody who's listening to this. But if you read this book that I wrote, Letter to Bob Avakian, you will learn a lot about this period. Because as they have these anti-Iran rallies, where all these Americans are rallying with their American flags, and they're saying Iran sucks, and all of that, there's a communist organization in the United States, probably one of the biggest and most visible communist groups of the new communist movement, is called the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP. This is really important. There's people listening now who really need to hear this, I'm sure. And the Revolutionary Communist Party, they have just cut their ties with China. And, when Deng Xiaoping came and met with Jimmy Carter at the White House, they had a Death to Deng Xiaoping rally where 200 of their members got arrested and they rioted against Deng Xiaoping. 2 of their members somehow were given press credentials. This is insane. Were given press credentials by the Secret Service. Now, do they do that for communists? They just give press credentials to communists. But they gave 2 members of the RCP press credentials. And they were in the White House, in the Rose Garden, when Deng Xiaoping was speaking. They pulled out Mao's little red book and started running at him and got tackled and did prison time for disrupting a press conference. And shortly after that, you have the Iran hostage crisis. Well, they're having these anti-Iran mobilizations. And what does the RCP do? There's these big anti-Iran rallies. Well, the RCP tells their members that it is their duty to be martyrs, to endure persecution. And there's truth in that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being willing to make sacrifices for the cause. So they kind of take advantage of people's willingness to do good. It's kind of sinister. But the RCP sends their members to these rallies with American flags. And as there's big crowds chanting Iran sucks and Jimmy Carter's a weakling and all of that, the RCP members go there with their communist flags and their big pictures of Mao, and they burn the American flag. And they chant, red, white, and blue. We spit on you. You stand for plunder. You will go under. That was their chant. Red, white, and blue. We spit on you. You stand for plunder. You will go under. Well, what do you think happened? If you show up at a big right-wing mobilization where all these people are there, bring back the hostages and all of that, they got the shit kicked out of them. And they would show up at these rallies and act a fool, and the crowd of right-wing conservatives would beat the hell out of them. And a couple of their members died, like actually got killed, right? One of their members was a guy named Damian Garcia, and he went to the Alamo in Texas, and he ripped down the American flag, and he put up a communist flag. And 2 days later, he was selling newspapers in Los Angeles, and he was stabbed to death. There was another one of their members who was found dead in New York City at the basement of an elevator shaft, on the bottom of an elevator shaft. And their members went to the hospital, and their members got beaten up. And in the lead up to May Day 1980, the RCP, they sent their members out to get the shit kicked out of them and get beaten up but they were part of the show, right? It was part of riling up the conservatives. They hated Jimmy Carter for being a weakling, but they also, they hated those communists who were un-American. Well, we now know, again, read this book. We now know that the RCP at this point was controlled by the John Birch Society. This is a fact, right? There's a good book on them that was published, called Heavy Radicals, the FBI's Secret War on America's Maoists. The RCP had been infiltrated by an organization called Western Goals. This is fascinating, right? But look up Western Goals. So there was a nonprofit, I guess, whatever you want to call it, an intelligence service created by the John Birch Society called Western Goals, the Western Goals Foundation. And the Western Goals Foundation was used by the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society was this anti-communist group, and the FBI would work with Western Goals, and members of the John Birch Society would be recruited in this nonprofit called Western Goals, and they would get trained in how to infiltrate communist organizations, and they would go into communist groups and pretend to be communists. And the Revolutionary Communist Party was under the control of Western Goals. And this was a fake, this was an informant organization. It was like, instead of sending FBI agents into the RCP, they sent volunteers. They sent people that were being paid by Western Goals, which is this nonprofit, and they joined the RCP, and they were directing the RCP internally, and they were using the RCP to help Ronald Reagan. This is a fact. Again, read my book. I quote all the data. Go and read. I'm not the person that discovered this. It was Aaron Leonard and others who discovered this. The RCP were basically being used by Republicans and conservatives to help set the stage for the Reagan Revolution. They were the rodeo clowns, right? And part of the issue was that the John Birch Society and the Ronald Reagan folks and Western Goals did not want to establish diplomatic relations with China. They did not want the USA to work with China. And so what they did is they had the RCP, they conveniently arranged for the RCP to get into the White House grounds and threaten Deng Xiaoping. They conveniently arranged for the RCP to trash the Chinese embassy on the day that it opened. They conveniently arranged for the RCP to be the rodeo clowns at all the anti-Iran rallies. And the RCP were like the face of the evil communists. The evil communists who would help set the stage for the Reagan Revolution, right? And the RCP was a caricature, right? The RCP, if you listened to them, if you listen to them even now, every other word is the F word. I was around the RCP, obviously, many years later, and I remember one of the older members said to me, I was talking to one of their members, and they were always wanting you to do things you didn't want to do, right? I would I'd have a college class, and they would call me up, and they would be like, I would be like, well, I can't, we need you to go sell the paper tomorrow. I said, well, I got class at that time. I got a college class. And they say, oh, well, why don't you explain to all the Iraqi children who got blown up this morning that your class is so much more important than them? I'm sure they'll understand. It was always, they were trying to get you to do things and trying to guilt trip you. And they call it struggling, where they're constantly trying to get you to do more. Right. And I mean, it's funny because nowadays, well, anyway, that's a whole ramble I can go on. Right. And so I remember in one of these conversations, I said, I don't think it's strategic there was something they wanted me to do. And I said, I don't think it's strategic. I don't think people are going to react well. And they said, oh, well, do you think people reacted well when we burned the American flag in front of the Vietnam Memorial the weekend it opened? And I said, excuse me? They said, yeah, when the weekend that the Vietnam Memorial opened, we were out in front of it burning the American flag, and people threatened our lives, and members of our group got beaten up and put in the hospital, but we did it because it had to be done. And I said, why would you do that? I said, isn't the Vietnam Memorial kind of against the Vietnam War? I mean, it just has all the names, and it was like the whole country was mourning it. And they're like, no, the Vietnam Memorial was saying that it was honorable to die in Vietnam. And so we were out there, and we had vets with us, and we burned the American flag. And it's like, you think about that. Who in their right mind would burn the American flag in front of the Vietnam Memorial on the weekend that it opened? I'll tell you who. Western Goals, the John Birch Society. They were the rodeo clowns, right? And the narrative of the Reagan Revolution was that Ronald Reagan was going to make America great again. Let's make America great again. And that Jimmy Carter was the left. Jimmy Carter wanted to negotiate with the communists. Jimmy Carter wanted more economic control over the economy, and that's communism. But Ronald Reagan is this hard, conservative, anti-communist, and he's going to make America great again. Does all of this sound familiar? This should all really, really sound familiar. Jimmy Carter was not a communist. He was a very effective anti-communist. His policies were not communism. They were degrowth fascism. They were driving down living standards. They were reducing consumption. They were impoverishing the American working class. They were purging his own party of labor unionists and others. They were degrowth Malthusian policies, but because he wasn't rah-rah against the Reds, because he was talking about racism, because he was apologizing for America's crimes, because he looked really weak, I just want to put on a sweater. The Reagan line was that he's a communist because he's not a rah-rah anti-communist. And let me add, the notion that communism is about poverty. This is where it gets very interesting. The idea that communists want everyone to be poor. Communists are against wealth. And that really got inculcated, right? During the 80s, that became a talking point of conservatives. It used to be, everyone understood, communists had built the labor unions. Communists said you deserve to get paid more money. Communists said that we want a rationally organized planned economy. But in the 70s and 80s, it was like communists are against money because money is capitalism. Having stuff is money. And leftists and communists are against consumerism. Owning things will not bring you happiness, right? That's Jimmy Carter. And so the Reagan Revolution was America rising up against communism. Except it wasn't communism. It was degrowth Malthusianism. It was the policies of Jimmy Carter. It was fascism. It was fascism, more or less, that they were rising up against. Now, there's one aspect of the Reagan Revolution. There's so many different angles you can talk about the Reagan Revolution with. But one aspect relates to the Korean Peninsula. So there's North Korea and there's South Korea. Well, in the 1970s, South Korea had a military dictator named Park Chung-hee. And Park Chung-hee was put into power by the United States, right? Right after the Korean War, the military dictator was Syngman Rhee, and the students in South Korea rose up and overthrew him in the April Revolution, and they had elected governments. But then a new dictator came into power, and the new dictator was Park Chung-hee. I'll put an image of him on the screen. Park Chung-hee. And Park Chung-hee was the military dictator of South Korea. And Park Chung-hee was not a communist by any means, but he was very much a Korean nationalist. And Park Chung-hee was very brutal. We don't want to pretend he was a nice guy, right? Park Chung-hee, the military dictator of South Korea, he had a concentration camp for homeless children. Park Chung-hee, the military dictator of South Korea, killed thousands of students. Anyone who was suspected of being a communist was rounded up and put in prison, executed. There were brutal political repression. He was a brutal, awful person. But in order to stay in power, he had to industrialize South Korea. And he created the middle class of South Korea. And Park Chung-hee, he set up POSCO, a state-run steel industry in South Korea. Government-run, not free market. Right? Government-run. Japan was forced to loan a huge amount of money to South Korea by the United States. And with that, he created a government-run state monopoly on steel. And South Korea started making steel and making a lot of money in the process. And, a lot of the companies, Hyundai, Samsung, these are companies that the government, did you hear that, folks? The government, the military of South Korea set up. Right? I am so tired of people pointing to that map, right? We see that map of like, oh, South Korea is all lit up and North Korea is all dark. And that proves that free market neoliberal capitalism is the best answer. Well, no. South Korea only became what it is because the military and the government forcibly set up corporations. And South Korea had a very heavily state-run economy under the leadership of Park Chung-hee, who was an authoritarian military Bonapartist. On behalf of the military of South Korea, he industrialized South Korea, and at the same time that he was brutally killing communists and rounding up homeless children to work to death in concentration camps, etc., Park Chung-hee was also industrializing the country and electrifying the country and, building industries and such. He was the creator of modern South Korea. Well, Park Chung-hee had this idea that they wouldn't need U.S. troops to protect them from North Korea anymore because he would get nuclear weapons. And he developed a nuclear weapons program for South Korea. Look this up. And they started developing nuclear weapons. And the French pitched a fit, and the USA threatened to put sanctions on them. And they finally did sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty after much outrage. But even after they signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, South Korea continued to secretly do work toward developing its own nuclear weapons. Well, even though the USA had troops in South Korea, and even though the USA had brought Park Chung-hee to power, they couldn't trust him because he was independent. He was not working in the interest of America. He was working in the interest of South Korea. And, that steel industry that he set up was competing with American steel companies. And, Hyundai and Samsung, those are all competing with American companies. South Korea is supposed to be a colony, but they found a loophole, right? They needed to stabilize South Korea so it didn't fall to North Korea into the hands of the communists. And so the USA kind of had to let South Korea industrialize, but the USA did not like that. They didn't appreciate South Korea industrializing. And Park Chung-hee kind of got the USA into a situation where they had to let him build South Korea into a strong country. And the USA did not appreciate that. And American media particularly did not like Park Chung-hee. So starting in 1978, the Carter administration started demonizing Park Chung-hee. And they launched what was called the Koreagate investigations. Read about Koreagate. All kinds of South Korean businessmen got called up before Congress. And It was a whole investigation of South Korean meddling and influence in American politics. And who was South Korea supporting? Republicans. And why? Why was the military dictator Park Chung-hee supporting Republicans? Because he was a hard right-wing anti-communist. He was a militarist. He wanted his own nuclear weapons. He didn't, and so the Republicans were accused of getting funded by Park Chung-hee and by the government of South Korea. And so all kinds of businessmen from South Korea were called before Congress. People were indicted. This is all very interesting. Well, Ronald Reagan, he thinks Park Chung-hee is a great guy. Park Chung-hee is fighting the commies. Park Chung-hee is a military strongman. He's growing his economy. Jimmy Carter, on the other hand, says that Park Chung-hee is violating human rights. He's not protecting people, and he's violating human rights. He's developing nuclear weapons. That's just not good for anybody. I'm concerned about the foreign meddling of this Mr. Park Chung-hee. He may be good against fighting communism, but he's meddling in our politics, and he's bribing members of Congress, and he's a right-wing extremist. We can't have this foreign influence in America. We got to investigate Park Chung-hee. Well, look what happened to Park Chung-hee. All right, go to the Wikipedia page and look at the death of Park Chung-hee. Park Chung-hee died October 26th, 1979, right before the U.S. presidential election, right? That was a year before, right? In November of 1980, you had the U.S. presidential election, but a year before that, Park Chung-hee died. How did Park Chung-hee die? Again, the problem with conspiracy theories is what I am about to tell you should not even be considered a conspiracy theory. It's so insane, right? I'm not saying that, he died of cancer, but it was secretly injected in him by the Illuminati. That's not what I'm saying. Park Chung-hee died in October of 1979 because he was having dinner with the head of the Korean CIA, right? The intelligence agency in South Korea is called the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, the KCIA. The head of the KCIA was having dinner with Park Chung-hee. And during the dinner, the head of the Korean CIA shot him in the face. So did the KCIA kill Park Chung-hee? Yeah, looks like it. Now, why? Why did the head of the KCIA kill Park Chung-hee? We don't know. Because the rest of the KCIA arrested him and killed him before he ever had a chance to say why he did it. The assassination of Park Chung-hee. Could you imagine this? This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not some crazy thing. The president, the military dictator of South Korea, is having dinner with the head of the South Korean military intelligence agency, the KCIA. And in the middle of the dinner, the Park Chung-hee gets blown away. And then the other KCIA agents arrest him, and then he never gets to say why he did it. This is not some crazy conspiracy theory. This is not did Lee Harvey Oswald act alone. This is pretty blatant. Right? I mean, if the head of the CIA had taken Kennedy out to dinner and shot him in the face, would it be a conspiracy theory to say that the CIA killed Kennedy? No, it wouldn't be. But that's what happened. They ate dinner together. The president, military dictator of South Korea, ate dinner with the head of the South Korean intelligence, and the head of the intelligence agency shot him in the face, and then got summarily executed and never stated his reason for doing so. Now, if that is not shady, I don't know what to tell you. But Ronald Reagan liked Park Chung-hee. And Jimmy Carter had investigated him. There was a division in the ruling class. And the degrowth Eastern establishment, the soft power manipulators who wanted America to look weak while implementing economic policies of degrowth, while demolishing the domestic economy, while securing the grip of the oil bankers over the world, by getting rid of usury laws, by dominating the world's oil markets, by having a president who looked weak and tired, just wasn't going to do anything, while creating situations where the Russians looked like the aggressors and the Chinese, the enemies, looked like the aggressors. By creating that situation, the lower level capitalists, the military industrial complex, the military, and all of them rallied the working class of America. They said, you don't want to be poorer. What was the catchphrase that won Ronald Reagan the 1980 election? Are you any better off than you were 4 years ago? Let's put that on there, right? This is, Ronald Reagan won. He won the 1980 election by a landslide. And this was, I'll put on the words that won him the election. And if you look at these words, you can understand what's going on now to some degree or other, right? I want you to understand this because this is all very, very important, right? And I mean, my opening remarks might go on for a long time tonight because this is complicated shit, right? This isn't simple stuff. This is complex stuff. This is mucho complexo, as they say, but it's important, right? So this is what Ronald Reagan said, right? As, keep in mind, wages in the United States, there's unemployment, there's inflation, the economy is very bad. We got this tired president. Put on a sweater. Don't turn up the heat. He's apologizing for the United States, and then this is what happens.
Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls. Will stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago? Is there more or less unemployment in the country than there was 4 years ago? Is America as respected throughout the world as it was? Do you feel that our security is as safe, that we're as strong as we were 4 years ago? And if you answer all of those questions yes, why then I think your choice is very obvious as to who you'll vote for. If you don't agree, if you don't think that this course that we've been on for the last 4 years is what you would like to see us follow for the next 4, then I could suggest another choice that you have.
Now, what is he saying there? He's saying, are you any better off than you are 4 years ago? Unemployment, inflation, are your wages higher? Is America more respected around the world? Well, if it's not, then vote for me. And this is, what he's saying, it makes perfect sense to average people, right? It's like, hey, if I'm any better off than I was 4 years ago, I should vote for Jimmy Carter. But if I'm not better off than I was 4 years ago, I should obviously vote for Ronald Reagan. Well, Ronald Reagan won the election in a landslide. 1980 election, he won it in a sweep. And the issue really got down to growth versus degrowth. Jimmy Carter represented the Eastern establishment, the oil monopolies that were in favor of degrowth and that wanted to play a long game against the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan represented the industrial capitalists and the military-industrial complex, and they wanted the United States to look strong and powerful, and they wanted to make lots of money through selling weapons, and they were more tied in with the domestic economy of the United States. They didn't appreciate the inflation and such. And so they rallied the working class, and they blamed it on Iran, right? They said that the energy crisis was because of Iran. They had their Iran sucks rallies, etc. And they used the communists, the Revolutionary Communist Party that was controlled by the FBI and Western goals. Read my book on it. Go read about Western goals. They used them as the rodeo clowns to get everyone riled up against Jimmy Carter, the communist. Jimmy Carter, who's signing treaties with the Soviet Union. And based on that, in the name of let's make America great again, Ronald Reagan came into office. Now, that is the Reagan Revolution. That's what happened. And it's taken me years as a leftist to understand this, right? It's taken me years. I've had to study a lot to learn about this, right? And that, you know, this is not the standard leftist interpretation. The standard leftist interpretation is that Jimmy Carter was friendlier, it was slightly better, but wasn't true to his principles, and Ronald Reagan was the face of Satan. It's more complicated than that. It's much more complicated than that. There are divisions within the ruling class. I recommend you read the Yankee and Cowboy War. I recommend you read, you know, Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. You know, there was one of the autobiographies of one of the LaRouche movement members. He wrote a very good autobiography. The Making of an American Political Prisoner. I actually learned a lot about from that book, actually. What's his name? And I would recommend this book. He goes into all of this in the book because he lived it, right? American Political Prisoner, LaRouche, what is his name? It's a very good book. Reflections of an American Political Prisoner by Michael Billington. I would recommend reading Michael Billington's autobiography because he lived this, and the stuff about the smokestack Democrats and Abscam. It's all in, you know, Michael Billington's book, Reflections of an American Political Prisoner. I mean, you can read this stuff in many different places, but it's hard to dig through, right? And there's actually a series of lectures online, like History of the United States. They talk about the rise of Thatcher. Rise of Thatcher in Britain was a similar thing. The left became synonymous with degrowth and stabilizing capitalism with degrowth, and the right became synonymous with military spending and growth, right? And so that's basically the situation. And the reason that I bring this up is because I am convinced that the Trump camp is trying to replicate the Reagan Revolution, right? And that they are looking at certain, and they're right in a way, because the Biden presidency is like a copy of Jimmy Carter in a lot of ways. Who is Biden? Hey, man, I'm tired. I'm just a tired old man. America's not a scary, threatening country, man. We're just tired, and we're just trying to have equal rights, and, you know, we're trying to not have racism, and of course, what did they do? They created a situation where Russia felt they have to intervene in Ukraine. And then they used that to demonize Russia, the same thing that Carter did with Afghanistan. And the same degrowth policies are being pushed. The World Economic Forum is saying you'll own nothing and be happy about it. And it's the same Rockefeller think tanks, overpopulation, all of that. It's the same stuff. Because Barack Obama was a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski, and Biden is a continuer of what went on in the Obama White House. And they're playing from the same playbook. This is what they know. So if Biden is trying to be Jimmy Carter, which he very clearly is, he's playing from the Carter playbook, it would make sense. Well, hey, if we beat Carter in 1980 with the Reagan Revolution, we need to have another Reagan Revolution. That would make perfect sense now, wouldn't it? Well, it would explain certain things that I'm seeing. For example, a big part of the Reagan Revolution was a mobilization to hate Iran. And what are conservatives being riled up to do right now? Hate Iran. And in fact, a big part of demonizing the left right now is portraying the left as being pro-Palestine at the same time that the left are burning the American flag, at the same time that the left are anti-American, right? The message of the left as they protest for Palestine is hatred for the United States, right? And I've said over and over again, the correct message should be money for jobs and schools in America, not weapons for Israel. and that there should be American flags all over those Palestine rallies. And it should be talking about how instead of taking care of the American working class, instead of providing for the American working class, we're giving all our money to Israel. But that's not the message of the rallies. And in fact, the message of the rallies is, that America is an evil, racist country just like Israel. And in fact, at many of the recent protests, they have burned an American flag, right? And they've gone out of their way to just do everything they can to get Americans to believe that the Palestine protesters hate them just as much as they hate Israel. Rather convenient. Another thing that I've seen is this weird Trotskyite group, the Revolutionary Communists of America. It used to be called the International Marxist Tendency, one of the most obscure, tiny little trot groups you've ever heard. All of a sudden, they're very visible now. They're all over mainstream media, and they're marching around with big red flags and hammers and sickles. And they can't explain communism, right? They have no ideological message with which to explain things. They're just marching around with big red flags saying, we're communists, communists, look at us, we are communists, communists. It just so happens to be happening at the same time that Trump supporters are being told that everything they don't like is communism. A little strange, isn't it? So we got people out there waving red flag. Oh, yeah, we're communists. They can't explain it. And Trump supporters are all being told that communism is to blame. And they're all being riled up to support Israel. And the left is seen as soft on communism, sympathetic to Middle Eastern forces that are against America. I'm telling you that the Trump camp is trying to reenact the Reagan Revolution. And the problem is, though, that part of what made the Reagan Revolution work is that you had an industrial working class in the United States still. You had working class people who were white who worked in factories. You don't have that very much anymore. I mean, there's some places. I know there's like a medical technology factory in Baltimore. There is still some auto manufacturing in Michigan and Detroit, but it's not like it was. You don't have a huge layer of steel workers in Pittsburgh and Cleveland. You don't have a huge automobile assembly line apparatus like you once had. I mean, we don't have an industrial white working class like we once did. And part of the Reagan Revolution was those folks had a booming standard of living post World War II. And then the first time it had ever declined was in 78. And so things had been getting better and their economy had been really well. And it wasn't until 78 that there was a drip. And so when that drop happened, those folks became much more conservative. They blamed the hippies. They blamed the counterculture. They blamed the civil rights movement. And the hard hats, they called them, were the base of Richard Nixon's supporters and Ronald Reagan's supporters. Working class white dudes who thought that if the hippies would just stop complaining, if the black people would just stop whining about civil rights, and if the hippies would stop complaining, if people could just wave the flag and love their country again, we'd be fine. That was their message. Well, and if you watch, there was a television program during the Nixon administration called All in the Family. And Archie Bunker is the dad, and he's the caricature of a Richard Nixon supporting conservative. And, he just thinks that all the people that are complaining and all the people that are against the war need to just shut up and, they need to love their country, right? There's another person. There's another television. There's actually a movie you can watch called The Last Man on Earth. And it's funny. So there's I was talking about this with a friend the other day. Right. So there's the Omega Man, the last man on Earth, and it's all based on a novel called I Am Legend. It was a novel in the 1950s, a vampire novel called I Am Legend. And they've made it into a movie like 3 or 4 different times. One of the movies is called The Last Man on Earth. And, the plot is that there's been a nuclear war and the human race have all been turned into vampires. And there's one human left. And the reason it's called I Am Legend is because he realizes that he's the legend. Instead of the vampire being the legend, the human, is the legend, right? That's the premise, right? I Am Legend. And they've made it into a movie many times, right? There's the Vincent Price version and all of that. But the version that they made with Charlton Heston, it's called The Omega Man. It's not The Last Man on Earth. It's The Omega Man, right? It's very interesting to watch because it's about politics. Yes, Will Smith made a version called I Am Legend. The novel is called I Am Legend. It's the Omega Man, the last man on Earth. The Omega Man is the version of it made in 1971, starring Charlton Heston. And if you watch it, it's the main character, Charlton Heston, is a conservative. He is a conservative white male, right? And the movie is really, really right-wing, right? Because he's a conservative white man, and there's been a nuclear war, and now the whole human race are vampires, and he's the last man on Earth. So every day he goes to the movie theater, and he watches the movie that was showing the day the nuclear apocalypse happened, which is Woodstock. And he watches Woodstock, and he hates those hippies. And he watches the Woodstock movie, right? And he's the last man on Earth. And, he's got his gun, and he hides in his house. And the vampires, this is very interesting. If you watch The Omega Man, the vampires in this version, they're not just vampires. They're a religious cult. They worship a guy named Matthias, who is their prophet, and they're against technology. They're a religious cult that believes that the nuclear war happened because of technology. And they worship Matthias, who is their prophet. And Matthias is like the head vampire, and he's saying that we sinned because we used technology. So we've got to destroy technology to make sure that the nuclear war never happens again. And they wear robes, and they do these weird rituals, and they drink blood. They're vampires, but they also have this, belief that technology is bad. They're hippies. They're hippies. They're degrowth hippies or whatever. And Charlton Heston is the last man on Earth. And he believes in civilization, and he's a right-wing dude with his gun. He's the Omega Man. And then, this is showing you how right-wing the movie is. How do they eventually get him? Well, one day he's out during the day, and he sees a black woman. Right? And he falls in love. He thinks there's another human being out there because the vampires can't come out during the day. And so he falls in love with this black woman. And it turns out that she was actually a vampire all along. She just had this quirk that she could be out during the day. And the message is supposed to be that it was trying to correct the race question is what destroyed America. Right? That's basically the message, right? It's the hippies and the counterculture. They destroyed America. Charlton Heston is your last man on Earth. You're conservative who's got his guns, but he feels sympathy. He falls in love with this black woman, and that's the civil rights movement. That's America starting to try and correct the race issue, and that the whole thing just comes apart, right? That's the message of the movie. Now, you want to talk about a right-wing movie. Holy shit, right? But that's kind of basically what the Ronald Reagan Revolution was saying. Right? We got to go back to before we started apologizing for America. We got to go back to the way things used to be, right? And if these damn hippies would just shut up, and if these damn hippies would just wave the flag and stop complaining, and if these black people would stop protesting and all of that, everything would be fine. And that makes sense that would be the white working class response to the first major economic downturn, because things had been going well for so long. And then there was this big cultural upheaval. There was the Vietnam War protest movement. There was the civil rights movement. So things got very confusing. And then the economy went bad. And so in the American mind, we just need to go back to loving our country. We need to, kind of go back. We need to undo the 1960s Cultural Revolution. We need to get out of the negative thoughts that we had during the 60s and if we go back to being patriotic McCarthyists like we were in the 50s, everything will be fine. That is their mindset. And that was the mindset of the Reagan Revolution. And Jimmy Carter and the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, were the symbol of people complaining. Jimmy Carter was always apologizing for America. The economy was bad and all of this. And Iran seized our embassy and we didn't do anything about it. And so the hard hats, your Reagan supporter, your hard hat Reagan supporter is out there with his American flag and his Iran sucks, and the RCP shows up and he beats the crap out of the RCP, and we're going to have a strong America again. That was the Reagan Revolution. That was the mindset of the Reagan Revolution. And if you really understand it, see, you have to think beyond good and evil. Leftism is too often framed in good and evil, right? Is there a huge amount of racism? Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. These white working class people that are telling black people who are getting lynched and murdered and Jim Crow to just shut up. That's a little bit, insensitive, to say the least. I mean, it's very easy to demonize the hard hats, the Nixon supporters and the Reagan supporters. Very easy to demonize them. But you have to understand that if people's life has been getting better for a really long time and suddenly it gets bad, they're not just going to go, oh, let's do something completely new. No. Instead, they're going to say, let's go back to what we had before. Right? It kind of makes perfect sense. Everything was going fine. And then all of a sudden we got confused and Roots was on TV and there were people protesting for civil rights and people were saying that the military was bad and burning their and then the economy got worse. Can we just go back to what we were doing before? That's how most Americans thought. That's how the bulk of the white working class felt. Can we just go back to what we did before? That was the Reagan Revolution. And leftism became the symbol of pessimism, degrowth economics, etc. And so the Reagan Revolution was this kind of white working class uprising against pessimism, right? And if you can understand it from that angle, you can understand what the Trumpers are trying to do right now. But it's not going to work. And this is the thing. If Donald Trump really wants to win, and I'm just going to throw this out there. If Donald Trump really wants to win, and he won't do this, right? And I think he might still win. I think there's a very good chance. My money is on Trump. Trump's going to win this election. But if Trump really wanted to win, right? Let's see if we can find it. Did Jimmy Dore gave some very good advice to Donald Trump, right? Jimmy Dore advice to Trump. Tucker. He went on Tucker Carlson and he gave advice to Trump, if I remember correctly, right? Jimmy Dore, Tucker Carlson, Fox advice. Jimmy Dore had very good advice for Donald Trump, if I remember correctly, right? But maybe we'll put the whole Jimmy Dore on Tucker Carlson. We'll put the whole thing on when he went on Fox News with Tucker Carlson. We'll put that on later. But right now, Kamala Harris's platform, her economic proposals actually sound pretty good. Right? Price controls to stop inflation. That would be great. Student debt. I mean, a lot of what Kamala Harris advocates, economically speaking, is great. We're not going to see any of it. We're not going to see any of it. It's never going to happen. When Biden took office, his joint address to the U.S. Congress, I was impressed. Very little did he say that I disagreed with. I didn't disagree with a lot of what Biden said in his joint address. He was going to rebuild the country. Great. He was going to have the PRO Act to empower unions. Great. Right. He was going to hire people. Great. I mean, I agreed with so much of what he said. He just didn't do any of it. And that's the problem. And Kamala Harris's platform, price control, she's not going to do that. She'll get in and the Republicans will oppose it. And she'll go, oh, darn, the Republicans opposed it. And she won't do it. They're not going to do any of those things. They're not going to raise the minimum wage really high. They're not going to wipe out student debt. They're not going to do any of that. None of it is going to happen. But it's a great platform. And a big part of the Reagan Revolution was this neoliberal free market economics, which was based on a layer of white workers who worked in industry and were making high enough wages that they felt like, hey, I can get a job in an auto plant. I can get a job in a steel plant. Stop complaining. Well, it ain't like that anymore. It is not like that anymore. Wages are much lower. Living conditions are much lower. You know, maybe we don't have a huge amount of unemployment at this time coming out of the pandemic, but the next generation doesn't have anything near what their parents had, right? You know, the American family home is a thing of the past. You forget about it. Americans in small towns and suburbs are renting their homes from banks right now, right? I mean, the roads are crumbling, the infrastructure. I mean, you forget it, right? So this idea that you're gonna rally the working class on a message of, we don't need no stinking price controls. That's for lazy people. Oh, get a job if you can. That's not going to work. That is not going to work. You think you're going to rally the working class against Bidenomics in the name of take it away, make it worse. You are deeply mistaken. And if you think you're going to rally the working class in the name of let Wall Street, let your boss do whatever he wants, weaken the power of labor unions, you are mistaken. Conditions have deteriorated. And we don't have that labor aristocracy anymore. That's a big part of Leninism. That the way imperialism works is that because the Western capitalist imperialists are dominating the world economy, they make super profits. And with their super profits, they can buy off a section of the working class at home. What stabilized the United States in the 50s and 60s and 70s, what stabilized them was that there was a layer of white working class people who lived comfortably enough that they were loyal to empire. We don't have that anymore. And in fact, your average Trump supporter is not loyal to empire. They're not communists, but they're against U.S. military interventions and wars. They're against the government and the deep state. They think the country is run by a group of rich people who don't care about us. They're anti-establishment, right? The rallying cry of the Ronald Reagan movement was trust the government, trust the FBI, support our military. That is not how your average Trump supporter feels. Your average Trump supporter thinks that the wars are being waged for someone else. Your average Trump supporter thinks the FBI rigged the elections in order to get Biden in, which they did by suppressing Hunter Biden's laptop. Your average Trump supporter, is economically suffering. And when they hear Trump say, make America great again, they think that means Donald Trump is going to take government action to make the economy better. And so the idea that you're going to have the white working class rise up to demand privatizations, to demand cutbacks, is a mess. Now, because the left is still identified with degrowth, and because communists have just become this gross caricature, they might be able to pull it off. But that said, anti-Israel sentiments among conservatives are very present. Listen to what Candace Owens is saying. Nick Fuentes has a lot of support and a lot of Trumpers that are listening to him, right? A lot is happening. And that the Reagan Revolution script, it depends on an American political setup that is not there. Average white working class Americans are not enthusiastic about war and empire. Average working class Americans that support Trump are not blindly supporting the military and the government and U.S. foreign policy. In fact, their critique of Biden is not that he's soft on Russia. It's that it's none of our business, leave Russia alone. All right. And the Trump camp, again, Trump and the main voices in the Trump camp are really anti-Iran and all that. But Nick Fuentes, a big part of the Trump camp, made no war on Iran go viral. And Candace Owens, a huge part of the Trump camp, is very, very anti-Israel. It's complicated. And so this Ronald Reagan Revolution script is not going to work very well for Trump in this upcoming election. The other thing is that a big part of what Brzezinski was doing, and the reason that the Brzezinski strategy was successful, was that they were able to divide China and Russia. That was Henry Kissinger's big achievement, is that after the Soviet Union had cut off China, Henry Kissinger worked very, very hard to get the United States and China to normalize relations, to bring U.S. investment into China, etc. And so China pivoted during the Carter administration to aligning with the United States completely in the Cold War. And until the fall of the Soviet Union, China was very much on the side of the United States in the Cold War. That's not happening now. Russia and China are closer together than they've ever been. And they're tied together economically speaking because they're both being targeted by the United States. Now, Republicans tend to focus on hating China and hating Iran. Democrats tend to focus on hating North Korea and hating Russia. But at the end of the day, they all hate all the countries, but it's a matter of emphasis. Republicans demonize China and demonize Iran. Democrats demonize Russia and demonize North Korea. Republicans demonize Cuba and Venezuela and Latin American socialist countries. Democrats tend to not be as hard on them, but they're harder on Russia. They're harder on North Korea. These are the geopolitical games our elite is playing, right? Yes, both parties hate the multipolar world. That is true. And these are the games that we're playing. But also, again, watch the Korean Peninsula. I've been telling you all that if you want to look for divisions in the U.S. ruling class, Donald Trump says he's going to start talks with Kim Jong-un again. The Wall Street Journal attacked Donald Trump for continuing to brag about his meetings with Kim Jong-un. Said, well, it didn't go anywhere. It wasn't successful. We know why it wasn't successful, because John Bolton sabotaged it, and so did Mike Pompeo, and both of them then betrayed Donald Trump. And then on top of that, we now know that, Sue May Kelly, the top ally of South Korea in the Obama administration and the Bush administration, a former CIA operative, has now been indicted as a foreign agent of South Korea. And the South Korean government last week announced a peace plan with North Korea. The United States wants to go all in and escalate against North Korea. How dare they give weapons to Putin? How dare they have meetings? How dare they welcome Putin as a hero? And South Korea went along with it a little bit, and then they're just like, no. And South Korea is just like, no, we're not going to escalate against North Korea the way you want. And so the United States retaliated, went after South Korea's top friend in Washington, Sue May Kelly. And then South Korea's president announced a peace plan for North Korea. Said if they take a single step toward denuclearization, he will give them all this money and all this aid. And the South Korean president got up and said, I want peace with North Korea. And I'm telling you, there are divisions within the ruling class. And, the Trump camp, I am convinced right now, is trying to reenact the Reagan Revolution. But politics in America has gotten much more complicated. And I guess I just have to end my remarks for tonight, and then we'll watch Jimmy Dore before we do the roll call. I have to end my remarks for tonight by telling you all that what we need now more than ever, okay, and I cannot stop saying this. I cannot say this enough. What we need now more than ever is a network of anti-imperialist activists in this country. People that believe in anti-imperialism. People that go out and publish pamphlets like this. Do you believe in growth? Distribute this. People who are meeting normal people and taking them to seminars and workshops and teaching them this ideology. That is what we need more than ever. The job that CPI is doing, the Center for Political Innovation, that our organization is doing, going out and doing outreach to normal average Americans and getting them to understand that Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela are our friends and Wall Street is our enemy, that we have a common destiny with the people of the world against imperialism, that if you truly love America, you should hate the Wall Street monopolists that are grinding us into poverty, grinding us into a low-wage police state, and trying to march us off to war, and that we should have a government of action that fights for working families. This is the message that the American people need to hear. And they need to hear it if Trump wins, and they need to hear it if Kamala wins. They need to hear it no matter what. This is what is missing in our time. The degrowth left sure as hell isn't giving it to them. And the MAGA, reinvent the Reagan revolution, conservative right isn't giving it to them. Right? And the people running around trying to claim the word communism, they're not giving it to them. We have to do it. We are the only organization that is doing the work that needs to be done, that is putting out an optimistic, pro-growth, socialist message. All the other socialist, communist groups are doing the woke thing, or doing the negativity, or trying to fight over who gets to own the word communist or whatever. We are innovationists. And we are trying to reach people who would never go looking for this. We're trying to reach people who love their community and love their country. Look, I have been reading some great stuff. There's some great writing I've been reading from the 1930s. A great piece I've been reading, a book called The Psychology of Reaction by Reuben Osborne, who was a leader of the British Communist Party during the 1930s and a psychoanalyst. He was a Freudian psychoanalyst. And he wrote two very good books. He wrote Marx and Freud, A Dialectical Study, very good book. And he also wrote The Psychology of Reaction, which I'm reading right now. I'm really enjoying it. And when I read The Psychology of Reaction, one of the things he points out is that it is urgent, he says, this is in the 1930s he's writing, that communists become the inheritors of the love of country. People love the country they live in. And that their love of country is in a lot of ways related to their love of their parents. Why do you think it's the motherland or the fatherland? It is natural to love the country in which you live. And that communists, for whatever reason, have neglected that and handed that over to the far right and the fascists. And he's writing in the 1930s, look, we made a big mistake. Hitler and Mussolini and Oswald Mosley, they're the owners of love for the homeland. And because of that, we are, behind. And that the problem, he says, is that a lot of our people just have it in their head that loving your country, being loyal to your homeland, loving your people, he says, to a lot of people that become communists, they think that's stupid. They think that's ignorant. They think it's arrogant or whatever, and it's not. Right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with loving your country. Right? And he says that, look, and he says that to most working class people, one of the most common criticisms of communists, and he's writing this in Britain in the 1930s, as he says, to working class people, communists are accused of loving every country except their own. Right? They say, look, you're having a hands-off China rally. You're having a solidarity with Spain demonstration. You're talking about how great the Soviet Union is. You love every country except your own. Well, if you look at the way communists act, even now, that's true. And to most working class people, loving every country except your own would be like a man who loves every woman except his own wife. Right? That's what it looks like, right? Imagine that a man, every time he talked about his wife, his own wife, he was like, oh, she sucks. Oh, yeah, she's got problems. Oh, yeah, she's got an ugly history. It's complicated. But then whenever any other woman walked in, he's like, beautiful. I love her. Would we think that that was a respectable, loyal husband? No, we wouldn't. No, we wouldn't. Right? And that, again, we want to moralize that. We want to do this whole woke thing. But when it gets down to it, people feel loyalty to the country in which they live. And the kind of people in our time who become communists have this weird, I'm not going to love my country. And it's just, there is an oppositional mindset that being a communist attracts. That's why I'm glad CPI are starting to use the word innovationist. And we're not denying Marxism, Leninism. We're not denying our roots, but we're not trying to own the red flag. And we're not trying to own communism as a brand, because communism as a brand in America attracts contrarians. It attracts contrarians, and it attracts people with daddy issues. Okay. And I'm just telling you, it attracts people. I mean, I don't want to say too much, but I have been doing communist stuff since I was quite young, and I have my own issues, and I don't deny that. I went looking for this because of alienation that I felt and all of that. But I'm telling you that so many of these young men who really want to be the top communist, they've got some psychological stuff they need to deal with. Okay. And that's fine. We all have psychological stuff. We all have a subconscious. We all have baggage. We all have trauma. We all have issues that we work with. Okay. So there's nothing wrong with that, except that those issues, that's the reason that the patriotism is an issue. That's the reason why communists just aren't comfortable being patriotic. That's the reason that, I mean, it attracts a certain contrarian type of person. And we need to not be the kind of movement that attracts people on that basis. Right? We're brought up in our country, we are taught that communism is the devil. And so the kind of people who become communists in America right now are the kind of people who would become Satan worshipers. Well, we don't want that. We don't. I mean, that's just not a winning strategy. And it took me years to piece this together. And I am not perfect. I'm not telling you that I'm free from all of this. But it took me a long time to realize that the big difference between me and the boomer communists that I worked in the Workers' World Party was that they became communists because they wanted to be bad. Right? They wanted to wave the flag of the enemy. They wanted to stick it to their parents. They wanted to give the middle finger. They wanted to tell this country that it's a racist piece of... That's why they became communists. I became a communist because I want to be good. Right? There was a part of me as a little child who wanted to be good. Right? And I learned about Jesus, and I learned about caring for the poor, and I learned about how you have empathy for other people. I learned about how you should help. You should try to do the right thing and sacrifice, and that despite all the issues that I have, despite all the issues that I've had over the years or whatever, the reason that I was attracted to communism was because I wanted to be good, not because I wanted to be bad. Okay? And our movement is cursed by the fact that it attracts people who join it because they want to be bad. And any movement that attracts people who join it because they want to be bad is not going to be a serious movement. And this is also, you read the Reuben Osborne book, he makes the point. He says, look, fascism is an evil ideology and all that, but there are a lot of people who join fascist movements with good intentions because they believe they're helping their country, because they believe that they're being selfless and they're working for the good of their community, and that fascists, as awful as they are, they appeal to the goodness in people to do the evil things that they do. And he says in the book, you have to distinguish between the fascist leaders and the people who are taken in by their ideology. And then if you demonize the rank and file fascist, you're missing the point, because a lot of times these fascist movements, despite the fact that they do evil, cruel, murderous, sadistic things, and, you have to admit, a lot of people think Hitler took power screaming, I'm going to come in there and kill all the Jews. He didn't do that. He did not do that, right? Hitler did murder millions of Jews, and Hitler, was a vile anti-Semite. But what was the message that Hitler came to power on? What ultimately enabled Hitler to come to power? He said, I will, in a year, if you put me in office, within a year, I will have every German employed. I will bring employment to every German person. That's what he said, and he did it. Now, the methods that he used to do it were degrowth methods. He put half the country in military uniforms and half the country in concentration camps. And he forced women out of the workforce, and, and he restarted military spending, and he built a network of prison camps, and he built some highways, the autobahns across the country, and he eradicated unemployment. Well, I mean, I must say that voting for somebody because you think they will provide universal employment is not a bad thing, right? And in Germany, they had the 1918 revolution that failed. They had Red Bavaria, the Bavarian Soviet Republic, and they had years of instability and chaos, and they had the Blut-May uprising in 1929, and communism in the German mind was associated with riots and desperately poor people and chaos. And Hitler was up there, and he was saying, look, I stand for stability, I stand for order, and if you bring me into office, when I get in a year from now, every single person will be employed, we will have full employment, I will eradicate unemployment. Made sense to them, right? Now, obviously, Hitler was very evil, and obviously, Hitler was a racist, and obviously, Hitler was all these awful things, but his appeal to people was appealing to something that is very genuine. Wanting a better life in their country, appealing to their opposition to instability and chaos, and promising to bring order and economic stability. Now, so if your attitude towards every German who might join with Hitler is, oh, you're a bad person, it's like you're missing the point, right? Hitler appealed to the goodness in them and used them to do evil, right? Whereas communists, we appeal to the evil in people in the hopes of doing good, right? We appeal to people's desire to rebel. We appeal to people's desire to tear it down and burn it down. We're appealing to all of people's angry, rage-filled sexual, and then with that, we're going to build an ethical, moral society where people treat each other nice. Well, again, I'm reading this great book by a great British communist during the late 30s, and he makes a very strong case. He says that the communists need to examine the rise of fascism and recognize that it shows that on the psychological plane, they were appealing to the wrong sentiments from people. It's very fascinating. The Psychology of Reaction by Reuben Osborne. I'm reading it. Reuben Osborne's first book, Marx and Freud, A Dialectical Study, and now his other book, The Psychology of Reaction, are very good. Very anti-fascist, very Marxist, and very classically Marxist in the dialectical sense. But he's talking about the psychology and how, they should have been the biggest defenders of the homeland in Britain. And they, and that he's urging the British communists, that we should be loving Britain, and not as a rhetorical device. We should really love Britain, and we need to get over this attitude that loving Britain makes you a fool or makes you a stupid person. No, we need to show that our policies really love Britain, that imperialism is despicable. Right? We're better than that. We're a better people than that. The crimes of British imperialism, that's not who we are as a people. We don't want to be that. And that socialism would make us stronger Britain, and a Britain that got along with the Soviet Union would make us strong, would be better. And that we need to be the real patriots of Britain. And he's right. Right? And it's not a rhetorical device. It's not we're putting one over. Well, we're actually the real patriots. No, you have to really mean it. And I said the exact same thing. I'm reading this Reuben Osborne book, and I'm like, I told the same thing to the CPI convention. I told them the exact same thing. I said, if we need to really love our country. No, it's not a matter of pretending to love our country to trick the stupid workers into thinking. No, we have to love our country. You need to love America. And I know you don't want to hear this, and especially if you're a teenager or whatever. I'm telling you, you don't have to love Jim Crow. Don't love American imperialism. You need to love America. You need to find something about the American spirit and the American psychology that you can identify with, and you need to love it. You need to love it. You need to find something about America, whether it's hard work and innovation, whether it's spirituality, whether it's the history of struggles for justice, the abolitionists, and the struggle for civil rights. And you need to find something that is American, and you need to love the shit out of it. I'm telling you that. And that's not easy. But if you actually want things to get better, you need to love America. Don't love the bad things about America. Find the good things about America and identify yourself with it. Find a way that you're part of America. Find a part of America that is you and own it and love it and make it your own. And say to the American people that I believe in socialism, I am an anti-imperialist, and I am you. I am this part of you, and this part of you is in line with anti-imperialism. That's what you need to do. And it's not easy. And if you are in this for some kind of emotion, if you're in this to serve some kind of emotional ends, I mean, it may not satisfy those emotional ends. And I'm sorry, but I'm telling you, we've got to change the way we think. So let's put on Jimmy Dore, and then I'll do the roll call, and then I'll answer super chats. So, okay, well, let's put on Jimmy Dore, right? We'll put on Jimmy Dore on Tucker Carlson, right? It starts at, okay, this is Jimmy Dore on Tucker Carlson. Okay, all right.
I went on.
But in a memo to his troops, 4-star Air Force General Mike Minahan wrote this, quote, "My gut tells me we will fight in 2025. Xi Jinping secured his third term and set his war council in October 2022. Taiwan's presidential elections are in 2024 and will offer Xi a reason. U.S. presidential elections are in 2024 and will offer Xi a distracted America. Xi's team, reason, and opportunity are all aligned for 2025. So what should we take of this? Again, you can be deeply skeptical, in fact, hostile toward China, and still be worried about going to war with China. Jimmy Dore is the host of the Jimmy Dore Show. He joins us tonight to assess. Jimmy, should we be paying attention to a memo like this? What do you think it means?
What I think it means is that the United States is trying to provoke and saber rattle with another nuclear power, right? This is what we were supposed to be afraid of was going to happen with Donald Trump, right? We couldn't have, he's a crazy man who's going to have his finger on the nuclear button. And now we have Demented Joe, who is saber rattling with 2 nuclear powers, and they get the corporate media sponsored by the military industrial complex to get Americans to cheer it on. And why do Americans cheer it on? Because they have no idea what's actually happening with their foreign policy. And what's worse is they have no idea that they have no idea that they don't have any idea what's happening with their foreign policy. We have 400 military bases surrounding China since the Korean War. Do we really think that China is getting ready to invade the United States? Because I tell you, they're not. They make everything we use in the United States. Why? Because the same people who want this war are the same people who took the good jobs that are manufacturing jobs in America, turned them into low-paying, crappy jobs, and then shipped them to China. And then we get angry at them for the system that we set up. If they're so corrupt, because that's the thing, Americans have no idea how corrupt their government is. They think our government's just regular corrupt, like, oh, Trump gave his son a job or Biden gave his kid a no-show job in the Ukraine war. That's not, the whole thing is corrupt. The $800 billion military budget is $800 billion of corruption. Why do we have to have 900 military bases around? We're the ones provoking this war, just like we provoked the war in Ukraine. We are now provoking a war with China. And who benefits? I'll tell you right now, your enemy is not China. Your enemy is not Russia. Your enemy is the military industrial complex, which has been fleecing this country to the tunes of hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. How many times
Amen.
We're going to have a defense secretary say, hey, we can't account for $2 trillion in the Pentagon again, which is what happened twice now in my lifetime. So again, people are being, the war machine cannot be stopped. Who's running this country? The war machine. It certainly isn't Joe Biden making these decisions. I would like to know who is making the decisions. And I just want to remind everybody, the United States is the world's terrorist. We just set the Middle East on fire in the last 20 years. And now we're doing a proxy war in Ukraine, which we provoked, NATO provoked, and it was just admitted that we provoked it by the former Prime Minister of Germany. And now we're trying to saber rattle with China, and they're predicting a war. Again, China's not going to invade us. China's not our enemy. We might have an economic war. That's what these are. These are economic wars. These are wars in Ukraine. It's about liquefied natural gas and making sure Germany and Russia never come together because we fear Russia's natural resources and manpower, and we fear them getting together with Germany with their technology and their capital. And so that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That's why we're doing the Ukraine war. This is all about hegemony, imperialism, and economics. And if there's a Marine somewhere, it's there because they're about to steal some natural resources from another country. As everybody's screaming about what a bad guy Putin is for invading Ukraine, the United States is currently occupying a third of Syria. And which third is that? It's the third that has the oil. And how do I know we're there to steal their oil? Because the president of the United States said so.
We're not even benefiting economically. Of course, that's the rub. Jimmy Dore, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. All right, names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations, names and locations. Who's with us? My name is Rice Jarrett. Welcome, Rice. Chad in Spokane, Raphael in Glasgow, Lawrence Johnson in Chicago, David Rennie from Ontario, Seasoned Noob in China, Jacob in Wisconsin, Jody in Tacoma, Washington, Batch in Arizona, Alex in Brazil, Mike in Las Vegas, St. David's, Bermuda, Just in Salt Lake, Ryan in Kansas City, Jenny in Cincinnati, Kieran in London, Flag, Arizona, Patrick in Maine, Valen from Seneca, Craig in Kansas City, Ed in Louisville, Finn in Duluth, Alex and Susan in Montreal, Tyblee, Pennsylvania, Steve and Ann in Ringgold, Georgia. Dan Niswander from Los Angeles does great morning messages, by the way. He's really good at it. Philip in Scablands, Tusker in Arkansas. You're on Due Dissidence. I had a really good time chatting with you on Due Dissidence. Shout out to you out in Arkansas, Tusker. Good to talk to you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Tomas in Malaysia. Very, very good. Tomas in Malaysia. I see we have a Rumble rant from Hempcar. So we'll answer that first. That's how we do it. Very good. Singapore. Very, very good. All right. So we got 5 super chats that have come in. If you got anything else you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat. All right. I will start answering. First, Rumble rant is from Hempcar. He said, didn't Gaddafi denuclearize and they killed him? Would it be good if North Korea gave up their nuclear arms? Well, that's North Korea's argument. And right now, America does not have a very good track record. Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction, and the USA invaded and overthrew it. Libya didn't have nuclear weapons, but they had some kind of chemical weapons program or something, and they got rid of it as a favor to the United States, and they got invaded and got overthrown. Iran was never trying to get a nuclear weapon, but they gave up a bunch of their peaceful nuclear energy program. And in exchange, they got Qasem Soleimani, their top general, murdered. They got more sanctions. Their economy didn't get bettered. Making a deal with America regarding your weapons or your nukes or whatever doesn't work out too well for countries. And I think this is, again, one of the disagreements between that soft power strategic crowd and the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex wants an arms race. And, the long-term folks, they want to, the way that the USA overthrew Gaddafi was that they got close to him. They made a good deal with him. They got a good relationship with him, and they sunk American business and American NGO, liberal, human rights activist people in there. And then they were able to spring up during the Arab Spring. This is what they tried in Belarus. Now, I don't know if you noticed this, but Belarus was fighting with Russia for a while. And, the US media was suddenly talking a little bit nice about Lukashenko, and Belarus was mad at Russia, and there was some tension. And then they had an election in Belarus. And all of a sudden, all the human rights activists and anti-Lukashenko people were out in the street. And then Belarus was like, oh, shit. And that was what it was. The USA was sucking up to Belarus to use them against Russia. But the whole time the USA was sucking up to Belarus, it was sinking its people in there, its human rights activists, to destabilize it. And that's what happens. The USA, it makes friends with countries, and then it sinks its people in there. That was, look at the 1980s. All these Eastern European countries were getting loans from American banks. They were getting more and more distant from the Soviet Union. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and all of that. And what happened? It led to their overthrow, right? And that this is how they play the game. Libya was led to believe that America no longer wanted to overthrow them, right? They cooperated with Bush in the war on terror at first. And then under Obama, they really escalated their friendship. And Obama arranged for the guy that they had arrested for allegedly being the Lockerbie bomber to go back to Libya. And Obama, Gaddafi would refer to Obama as my little African son. And Libya really believed that America was their friend. Well, it's not. It's still a socialist country. It's still an anti-imperialist socialist country. I mean, they might give you favor in one circumstance, and they might, and part of the reason that Libya was able to go under is as Libya got some favored treatment from the United States, they dissed a lot of their international allies, right? Gaddafi had a falling out with the Palestinians, right? And I think Gaddafi said a lot of true things. He said, look, the Palestinian leadership, you guys you're not in it for real. You're very corrupt, and you've turned this into a way to make money. But he cut his ties with the Palestinians. He dissed China. He dissed Russia a little bit, and he was sucking up the United States while trying to maintain his socialist anti-imperialist economy. And so he was pretty isolated at the time. And people say similar things about Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, again, he had burned a lot of bridges, and, it's like he was isolated in a way. The reason Syria would have been overthrown if it wasn't for Russia. They had a close relationship, and for China, right? But Gaddafi, I will criticize him a little bit. He burned a lot of bridges in the anti-imperialist camp in the final years, and it was the United States was giving him a lot of special treatment. So, don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. All right. Thank you, Hempcar. So now we'll start answering super chats. Trump also did degrowth as president, Reagan too. Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to exactly. You have to remember that there's two forms of degrowth. The main form of degrowth is called austerity, privatizations, cutbacks, reducing wages, reducing the role of government in the economy, cutting government jobs. That's mainly conservatives, and Trump certainly did that as president. He lifted regulations, he lifted taxes on Wall Street and all of that. He did that because he believed that would cause more investment, et cetera. But, that by cutting infrastructure, you can't cut public services and think you'll get economic growth. And Republicans think that. Conservatives believe that if you cut public services, you get more economic growth. No, you don't. So that's the first thing, right? So I guess that, if you want to say that, fine. That's the first method of degrowth. And that was very popular in the 70s and 80s and 90s, right? Neoliberalism. That's neoliberal economics. That's the first major form of degrowth, is you just loot the public sector, you sell off government assets, you eliminate the jobs of government workers, and as a result, the economy goes down because all that spending power is gone, right? So that's degrowth. And then you have another form of degrowth, which is sorry, a little distracted here. That there's like forced government degrowth. And we're seeing more of that now with the green energy regulations, with crushing, with requiring companies to, use lower amounts of energy with, it's like the government is rationing and regulating the economy to degrow. But both of them, both austerity and government degrowth, they're both based on smaller is better and bigger is better. Growth is the nature of mankind. So yes, Republicans generally, they push economic austerity, looting the public budget. That is degrowth. Democrats, especially now, are pushing, heavy-handed state degrowth. Both are bad, right? Socialism is about building. We want to build so much that the global that there's so much wealth that the need for the state fades away. That's what we want, right? We want there to be so much abundance in the world that there's no need for a government. So bigger is better, right? We don't want less. And that, one heavy-handed government degrowth program that the Democrats have been pushing for a really long time is called a National Service Initiative. And if you look at it, it actually sounds very socialist and it sounds very great, right? The idea is that young people will be required when they graduate from high school to either join the military or do a year of national service, where they go out and work for the good of the country. Doesn't that sound great, right? Doesn't that sound like Stalin and the 5-year plans? Our young people going out and mobilizing to work hard for the good of the country. That sounds great. But what is it really? It's we'll have young people go do the job of government workers for free. Instead of paying a postal worker a decent salary with union benefits, we'll have some college kid do it for free. Instead of paying a teacher to teach in a low-income area, we'll have some college kid do it for free or close to free. The Teach for America program. Barack Obama put it, it's this great program. If you go teach in a low-income area, I'll forgive your student debt. It was a union-busting program. Those Teach for America teachers got paid poverty wages. They didn't get any union representation. It was a way to weaken teachers' unions. It was to take those Teach for America teachers took a job away from a teacher that got union benefits. Teach for America was an awful program. And that is a degrowth program, but it's the government doing it, and they frame it as if it's socialistic. And it's not, right? Right? And so they're both austerity. They're both degrowth. Degrowth is reducing consumption, reducing the amount of wealth in society. And the Republicans do it by just straight up eliminating government involvement. And Democrats do it by the government getting involved and doing it in the name of these egalitarian whatever. But they're all based on the premise less is better. Less is not better. Less sucks, as Peter Coffin says. What would you tell young people who feel out of place with these leftist groups? Many young people with rage and anger. Well, I would tell them, on the one hand, that it's normal to have rage and anger when you're young, right? Because you need to not be under your parents, right? You need to go out on your own. You need to establish your own identity separate from what your parents and society has imposed on you. You need to question, what you've been told. So being angry and rebellious as a teenager, as someone in your 20s, is normal and healthy. But it's not the basis for a serious political movement, right? And that serious political movements don't recruit. Communism in America is a college phase. Let's just be real about this, right? PSL, the different groups, it's a college phase. When you're in your 20s, you join one of these groups, and you're in it for a couple of years, and then you go back to having a normal life. And communism is not supposed to be a college phase. And if you go to any country in the world where they have a strong communist party or a strong anti-imperialist movement, it is not a college phase. You go to Lebanon, Hezbollah is not a college phase. You go to Venezuela, Bolivarianism is not a college phase, right? You go to Greece, the Greek Communist Party is not a college phase, right? And that these, communism in America is run by people that have kind of set it up to be a money-making operation for people to have a college phase around. And that is not a serious political movement. So I would say to those younger people that are angry, it's okay to be angry. It's fine. But you need to understand that that isn't the basis for a serious political movement, right? And that the feelings that young people have are important, and that, we need to appeal to those feelings on some level, but we have to aim much higher than that. We need to be appealing to the bulk of the population and their desire for a better country, not just the feelings of youth for rebellion. Tusker, I'm really glad you appreciate this. You do great work with Due Dissidents. I'm glad you appreciate the content here. Very, very good. Thank you. I'm glad you're appreciating this. All right. RFK dropped out soon and endorsed Trump, right? That's the inside information I've gotten as well. And, I think that's for the best, right? Again, I think Trump is kind of the lesser of two evils in this election. It's hard to say that, though, because there's a lot of bad things about Trump. There's a lot of things I don't like about Trump, but I wrote a book about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is very, very dangerous and scary. And, and RFK, I mean, he's like Trump in a lot of ways. He's got an anti-establishment vibe, but super pro-Israel, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. So Gala, and I mean, RFK, I felt excited about RFK until the Israel thing got going. And the way he was talking about Israel was just so bad. He didn't just kind of support Israel. Tulsi has really let me down in a lot of ways too. And it shows that there are divisions and that this is complicated. But I think his campaign was important. He said a lot of things that needed to be said. He spoke on foreign policy in ways that I think Trump wouldn't be speaking the way he is about Ukraine and stuff if it wasn't for RFK. He kind of pushed Trump to be better on those issues. So I think a contribution was made. I'll say that. Now, Ted Roosevelt, dude, I see your super chat that you came in there. First of all, we don't talk about those people on, there's certain people, we just don't bring them up on this stream, right? And I'm not talking about them on this stream. I am not talking about them on this stream. Like, I'm not doing that. And do you see this? I don't know who you are or whatever, but it's like, this is what I'm talking about, right? I don't want to fight with stupid internet people, okay? And you are trying to get me to fight with stupid internet people. And I'm not trying to do that. And it's like, how long has it been since I've interacted? It's done. It's done. Okay. And like, this is not serious, right? So that's all I'm saying about that, right? Ted Roosevelt, Stalinist. I'm not going to put any chat on the screen that mentions that person or certain other people, right? And they have nothing to do with what we're doing here. And they want no relationship with us. That was made abundantly clear to me. They want no relationship with us. So what am I supposed to do? Right. And let me just say this again, right? There are so many people, because this is just internet entertainment, they can't get over that that certain influencers have targeted me for a really long time. Right. And it has to be my fault somehow. I have been dealing with this for years, right? Since before that person you mentioned has ever been around, right? I remember, when I started getting targeted by Thought Slime. Oh, Caleb, if you just address the do-good thing, Thought Slime will like you. No, he won't. No, he won't. Right? Oh, why can't you just, just explain to them that, no, it's not my fault, right? These people, these influencers, they start targeting me, and they do it for a reason, because they're competitive. I mean, they want to be competitive. If they wanted to get along with me, they would find a way. And I have bent over backwards to try and be friendly to that person, to be friendly to other people. They don't want that. And, I'm sorry, but I have some goddamn self-respect. It's been 2 years of bending over backwards, 2 years of trying to accommodate people in those communities. They don't want to get along with us. They have made that abundantly clear. They don't want to get along with us. They have said awful, horrible things, and we've been willing to get over that. We've been willing to reconcile. They don't want to get along with us, and that's not my fault. And I'm sorry if that ruins your ability to be entertained by them. And I'm sorry if you want to keep believing otherwise so that you can still like their streams. Look, I'm not doing an entertainment thing here, right? I hope you all learn from this. I hope you find it entertaining. But I'm actually trying to build a real movement. I'm not trying to do an internet entertainment show. So, I'm going to talk differently, and I'm going to act differently, and I'm going to do things that are aimed at building a real movement, because what we need is a real movement. And, and when you build a real movement, you need to get along with people and get stuff done in real life. So I have a very different approach than certain other people do. And certain people don't like me for a variety of reasons that are absurd, ridiculous, hypocritical, inconsistent, whatever. And it's none of, I'm done. I'm done. Right? I'm done. If people want to get along with me, they can. For the longest time, I said one phone call and all of that. Well, I had one phone call. And on that phone call, it was made abundantly clear to me, we want nothing to do with you. We are totally fine with the way people in your family have been harassed. We are totally fine with what the FBI is doing to the Uhuru movement. I started talking about the Uhuru movement, on the call, and this person representing somebody says to me on the call, and he starts, oh, they're horrible, and starts bashing them. Basically, he's okay with the FBI targeting the Uhuru movement. I mean, these people, I want nothing to do with them, right? If that's their attitude, right? I mean, I got better shit to do, right? I'm trying to build a network of people that can oppose war. And other people are doing an internet entertainment show. And part of the show is fighting with me. I don't want to fight with them. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. And there's always something. There's always something, right? There's always something, right? I have nothing to do with these people. I don't interact with. There's always something. There's always some way that we have to fight with Caleb again. No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. So stop it, Ted. I would urge you to stop it, right? Grow up. No one here cares about that person. If people want to watch that person, they can go watch him, right? But we're not here to talk about that. No one's talking about that person. No one's, we're doing our own thing here. Okay? So seriously, right? I know it'll be fun for you to watch us fight, right? That's part of the fun. And that might be how other people do their streams. That's not what we're doing here. We're doing something different. So that's that. All right. Did Oswald Mosley have any redeeming traits? I mean, I don't know. I mean, what does that mean? I mean, that's a weird question. I have read some of the stuff that the British Union of Fascists and others published. I think it's interesting that they focused more on economics, but they were still, they were Nazis. They were, they used the Nazi salute. They used the Nazi party anthem, the same theme song to the Horst Wessel song. They were anti-communist black shirts. What I think is interesting about Oswald Mosley is that when he was running the British Union of Fascists in the 1930s, the rhetoric was primarily economic. He did talk about, anti-Semitism. He did talk about anti-communism, but a lot of his rhetoric was mainly economic, and that is interesting to me. But honestly, I don't speak German. That might have been what the Nazis did. I don't know, right? I do know that anyone who's talking like a fascist or a Nazi in America or in post-World War II times, they're just spewing racism and anti-Semitism. But when I read Oswald Mosley and his stuff, it's mainly like economic policies, right? Like dramatic economic policies. That they want to enact. And that's smart, right? That's good. And that's what communists should be doing. And I'm reading this book by, The Psychology of Reaction by Reuben Osborne. And he's saying that's what communists need to do. Right. So yeah. But yeah, there you go. So that's my response to that. That's that. So, yeah. All right. Well, I think that's our show, folks. So it's been fun. I'll be back tomorrow night. As always. Oh, real quick. If you're able to send anything to help, offset the costs of the team in Chicago, that would be appreciated. Right. So if you're able to send a donation to the GoFundMe to offset the costs of our team out in Chicago, we would appreciate it. It would make our lives easier, so that's an option. And I said this earlier, but I'll say it again, right? Every morning on the CPI YouTube channel, we have a morning message. And hey, Tusker is in the chat. Tusker, why don't you make a morning message? Can you make a morning message? That would be awesome if you made a morning message, right? But anybody else, right? It's open. It's open submission. So every morning on the CPI YouTube channel, the next one here, I'll put the link for the morning message. It'll go up at 6 a.m. tomorrow, right? Tomorrow's morning message, right? It's going to be great morning message. And it'll be on tomorrow. It's going to be a great message. But anyway, what we really need people to do is make morning messages, right? Because we have a crew of people that are very dedicated to making them, but we need more people to step up and make morning messages. So if you can just take a few minutes, just go to this link and record yourself and submit a morning message. If you got 2 minutes right now, if you can think of something that's inspiring, one thing I think people can do for our morning messages. I'm just throwing this out there. If you can't think of anything to say, just read from one of our books, right? You got a copy of the growth book. You got a copy of the Kamala Harris book. Just read from it, right? Read from it for 2 minutes. Say, hey, for my morning message, I'm going to read to you from the Kamala Harris book and read from it. I'm going to read to you from the Green Book by Gaddafi and read from it. that's my advice, right? Make a morning message, right? Because this is what CPI, the morning messages are a way that we can support each other, right? That's the idea, is that every day you start with a morning message. You start your day on the right foot. You start your day thinking about the world and how we can pull together to try and change the world. That's the point. So, submit a morning message. Great. Sounds like Tusker's going to do it. Great. We would love to have a morning message from you, Tusker. I hope you go and record it right now. Yes, that's what I like to hear. Tusker is going to do it, and I hope there's a few other people in the chat that make morning messages. We are about positivity. We are about growth. We are about supporting each other in CPI. That's what we need right now. So if you have the time, go record a morning message and go start listening to the morning messages. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. Thanks, everybody. And on that note, I am going to end the stream from here. So, new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.